Okay, good evening. I'd like to welcome everyone to the City Council Work Session meeting of Tuesday, July 30th. Call the meeting to order and ask for approval of the agenda.
Second.
All in favor?
Yes.
And we do have Councilor on.
I do not believe she's on.
I don't see a phone number here yet, or her name popping up.
Okay. So welcome to the planning.
Just one of anything.
Madam Mayor,
Yes,
Lisa Kerr is trying to dial in. We were both having trouble getting into this meeting. It was delayed. She's actually calling me again now. I told her I'd let you all know if she didn't get in. Hold 1 second. I'm going to try two things at once. I'm just letting the joint committee know you're not able to get in. Okay. Hey, Robert, I'm on the phone with Commissioner Kerr. She's saying that the message to her is that the meeting hasn't started yet.
We need to can you remind her to use the link that was on the website, not the one we used from the last meeting? So I sent her the link to the meeting page.
She hears you and she is doing just that.
Okay.
technology at work. Okay, so
She's
first
gonna go ahead,
item.
it looks like.
First item on the agenda is public comment. If there's anyone that would like to make public comment, you're going to raise your hand. I'll call on you. You'll give when you're up here, you'll give your mailing address. And you have a 3-minute limit, and we ask you to be kind and respectful as you're doing that. So is there anyone that would like to make public comment? Jan?
Jan Siebert Warmond and my husband Wes Warmond, P.O. Box 778, Cannon Beach. Dear Mayor, City Councilors, Planning Commissioners, and DRB members, thank you all for your time and dedication to this challenge for our community. There are concerns we'd like to share with you tonight. One, again, how are we to ensure that affordable and workforce housing will be the outcome of this process, rather than just opening up our town to more profit-driven development in general? Two, in regard to approach, we thought we were going to find a few places throughout our community to try out affordable and workforce housing, rather than opening up our entire town, including our iconic downtown, to vastly increased density and development. Three, water, water, water. We have a relatively small watershed. Ecola Creek is not the Columbia River. Climate change is here. We've already experienced some summers with extremely low flows in Ecola Creek. How far are we willing to push our ecosystem, packing more and more people in to live here and visit here in this small watershed, while the fish and wildlife, which we are fortunate to live with, are struggling to survive? We are responsible for their protection and their continued viability. Their needs must be carefully considered when attempting to make any changes to the development density of our community. 4, tree canopy is key to keeping our entire town cooler, shadier, healthier, and true to our village character. We've aspired for decades to be an environmentally sustainable and resilient community. We need to make sure that our Cannon Beach policy updates uphold this honored tradition. We can creatively strive to have affordable and workforce housing as long as we remember to respect Mother Nature in the process. People, residents, and visitors alike come here to breathe, relax, connect with the natural world, and be restored. We sincerely voice our support for healthy, balanced, affordable, and workforce housing. It is of the utmost importance how we protect the green infrastructure of our community throughout this process. Thank you.
Thank you, Jen. Anyone else like to make public comment that's in the audience? Come on up.
So I'm Claire Strofe, PO Box 88, Cannon Beach. Gosh, yes. And while I am not technically a resident, this is my home. My family came to Cannon Beach and opened Strofe's Grocery in 1951. Back then, this was not a tourist town, but a small logging community. We all took care of each other. My grandfather, Harley Strofe, was known to provide food and supplies to local families on credit so that they could get through winters with little work. And his wife, Margaret, he and his wife, Margaret, raised their 3 sons here, something that they most likely could not do today. The community they helped create here is no longer what Cannon Beach reflects. There are so many business owners, community leaders, young families, and just wonderful people that are constantly at threat of losing their housing and being forced out of their community, taking all of their contributions with them. Jobs here are severely limited with almost no upward mobility. I know single mothers working 2 to 3 jobs and barely getting by. The only reason they do so is with the help of family support, not the community. I have been watching this long-running debate around the 3 projects planned and have honestly been deeply disappointed by this council's priorities. The old school was approved by voters as a community space. It has now become another facility for tourists with seemingly no thought to parking, the overall goals that were originally put forward, and a $12 million price tag that will probably increase. The new city hall also feels outlandish and wasteful. Why are we paying twice as much per square foot as Manzanita? Why are we pouring millions and millions of dollars into a building in the tsunami zone? I have a couple questions that I'd like the council to consider when they can. Why are you afraid of a vote on these large ticket projects? If you don't feel that the community supports them, why are you really representing the will of Cannon Beach residents? Forgive my bluntness, but 30 years is a long time to have a nearly $40 million debt hanging over the city. A debt largely based on the current tourist status quo. Our world could and probably will completely change in 30 years, but this current generation of city councilors will not be the ones facing that in 30 years. People of my generation will be. While I support the base of these projects, I do not support the lack of transparency, voter approval, or the price tags. This community is dying, and picking these large project items seems to be the current priority and not dealing with housing or lack of jobs or our low families. We do not have families here anymore. So thank you for hearing my comments, and I hope that the priorities shift.
Thank you. Anyone else in the audience? Andrew?
Andrew Tonry, PO Box 664. First, I'm thankful for the volunteer committees that are working on these issues. But we need to make sure that going forward, ad hoc committees are established and operated both fairly and transparently. 2 committees recently, Housing and Trees, have been tasked with important issues that could reshape Cannon Beach as we know it. But these committees were created without an open application period and then conducted privately. Important stakeholders were left out. The deck was stacked and the public has been kept in the dark. When we created the ad hoc committee for the Nakus project, there was an application period that was open to all. Meetings were held here in this room, available by Zoom. Minutes were kept, and you can review them on YouTube. We need to return to that standard. Now, on to housing. Creating more attainable housing in Cannon Beach is the #1 priority of this community. The city's 2017 survey said creating attainable housing was the top priority. And the housing survey of 2024 showed that 81% of respondents said Cannon Beach is failing to live up to its policy in the creation of new housing. Respecting the wishes of the community, we should prioritize housing first. Everything else is a distant second. Our population is shrinking, our services diminishing, and our businesses are struggling. That means passing the recommendations included in this packet without delay. A few examples. We need to allow for and encourage increased density. We need to reduce parking requirements. We need to close the ADU short-term rental loophole. We need to allow multiple 2 dwellings on every lot. We need to allow 3rd-story dormers. And we need to increase mixed-use developments. Please pass the proposals as stated by the experts we've hired. Refrain from nibbling away or kneecapping these measures. Helping more full-time residents and young families live in Cannon Beach also means rejecting punitive proposals that will make it more expensive by tens of thousands of dollars when trees exist on buildable lots. Making building harder and more expensive will ensure that we stay on our current trajectory, that wealthy second homeowners can afford Cannon Beach while the middle is priced out. Indeed, when it comes to the cost and shortage of housing, Cannon Beach is under extraordinary pressure. That's why it's time for some extraordinary measures. Begin work towards enacting a vacancy tax. That's not all. We need to grow eastward, expand the urban growth boundary. We need renter protections and rent control. We need to repurpose the RV park. We need market incentives and deed restrictions to encourage full-time residents. We need to eliminate residential low density across the board, especially east of 101. To do this, God forbid, we may have to cut down a few trees. These are the costs that will keep our community a community, because right now we are trending in the wrong direction. With regard to short-term rentals, they're not helping, they're hurting. Vacation rentals have no place in residential zones. Businesses don't belong in our neighborhoods. Airbnbs are not neighbors. In the midst of our housing shortage, it boggles the mind. We are subsidizing the mortgages of absentee second homeowners. Airbnbs are anathema to our goals as a community. So I implore you, begin sunsetting all residential short-term rentals today. Some of these ideas may be controversial, but sacrifices will be necessary. It's time to stop pretending otherwise that we can have middle housing unless we're willing to make some real change. I'll leave you with my favorite quote on the matter. Some of you have heard it before. You can't say you are against inequality in America if you're not for more affordable housing in your own backyard.
Thank you. Anyone else in the audience? Is there anyone on Zoom that would like to make public comment? If you'd raise your hand.
Yes, there's a Lynn Halverson.
Okay, Lynn, go ahead.
All right. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Please start with your mailing address.
For sure. Yep. Lynn Halderson, PO Box 1151. First of all, I hope everyone's doing well and really thank you for taking the time to listen and take our comments to heart. It really does mean something. So thank you. I've lived in Cannon Beach since the fall of 2010. And since that day 13 years ago, I've created a life for myself here and have become part of the community, both socially and professionally. I've worked at a variety of local businesses and I'm currently employed as the events coordinator at the Chamber of Commerce. And my job is supporting and promoting local businesses and putting on the events and festivals in our community. But to put it simply, I'm invested here. I live here, I work here, Cannon Beach is my home, and I want to be here forever. But sadly, there's one major factor standing in the way of me and my peers doing exactly that. The long-term middle housing isn't just lacking. It's non-existent, and that's terrifying. In the time that I've lived here, I've moved no fewer than 8 times. Some of that was my own choosing, of course, but too many were out of pure necessity. As owners of my rental decided that they could make more money renting it as a short-term summer rental. And while that's true, I was left scrambling. 6 months ago, I was living downtown in the Sea Lark Apartments, dubbed workforce housing. I lived there for about a year and a half. During my time at the Sea Lark, the unit below me stayed empty. In a town where folks are scrambling for housing that is beyond absurd. Instead, it was used as a vacation spot for a local business that was renting that unit. So instead of housing an employee who would be actually working in the town, as the name of the apartment implies, they instead kept it open for their own families who would come and go and use that 1-bedroom apartment, leaving trash in the yard and taking up very limited communal parking. During my time at the Sea Lark 2, I received an email from the property manager stating that rent would be raising because the city of Cannon Beach had informed him that the median income in town had raised 14%. Now, I don't know a single person who has had that sort of a raise, and I've asked a lot of people. What is the incentive for me to work harder, pick up more hours, climb a ladder, if that's all just going to be taken away? Whenever I mentioned that I lived in workforce housing, folks would always assume that it meant affordable. Those two things are far from connected, and when over half your paycheck or my paycheck is going towards rent, not including utilities and the plethora of other bills it takes to survive, I just ask, how is that sustainable? It's not. My time at the Sea Lark confirmed that everyone has a right to live in this incredible place, whether they are part of the workforce or not. And we should be able to acquire housing without subsidies so that there isn't a constant worry of making too much money. I believe that a vacancy tax is a step in the right direction, as is reducing the number of short-term rentals. Thankfully, I'm now renting a duplex at a fair price from a wonderful local woman who understands how difficult it is to survive here. And yes, survive here. In addition to my main job, I have no fewer than 3 other side hustles just to get by. And let me be clear, if I were to have to leave my home, I would quite literally have nowhere to go. And every single person that I know who doesn't already own a home is in the exact same spot. Say that we're at a tipping point. We've moved beyond being hard or bad. It's just non-existent, and I don't see anyone trying to do anything major about it. So to conclude, if long-term middle housing continues if we continue in this housing crisis, we'll continue to lose our workforce. And if there's no one to live here, work here, Cannon Beach as we know it will cease to exist. It's that simple. We see and feel the repercussions every day. Shops unable to stay open more than just a few days, shortened hours, spontaneous closings, and this is because of staff. The downtown will only continue to slow down and disappear altogether. It'll become a bedroom community, a stopover for people continuing on their way with no workers. And that's just not what I want for this town. My friends and peers who've spoken just before me have said some great ideas, and I hope that you hear them. So thank you for your time. I really, truly appreciate you listening.
Thank you. Anyone else online?
No.
Is there anyone else in the audience? Okay, thank you. Jen, is that phone number? Lisa?
So 6.
Yeah.
And it more than likely is Lisa.
Okay.
And then she'll have to hit, was it #6 to
It was
unmute?
star six.
*6 to unmute.
Lisa, did you hear that?
Will you repeat it, Madam Mayor, please?
You're gonna.
I have Lisa on speakerphone. She's just coming down, but she did not hear what you said.
Okay, *6.
You could star 6-9.
Done that 100 times, it didn't work.
She says she's done that 100 times and it doesn't work. She's going to come down.
She's
just heard her.
Was that not her?
It is her on the phone, but it isn't, it's a pretty weak link. She's on my speakerphone listening to my computer
Oh.
and said it's not conducive to interacting. So she's going to come down.
Come to City Hall.
Yeah,
Yeah, with my N95.
she has an N95 mask. It says she'll
Okay,
be okay. All right. Thank you.
thank you. Okay, so we're going to.
What, ship code or something?
Yes,
Oh.
Should not come.
Yeah, I don't think that's a good idea.
This room has no ventilation.
Yeah.
We have. Do you want me to try to launch? In the conference room, there's.
Would everybody be comfortable? My idea was to put her in the conference room. And not have her come out here.
You want me to call her again?
Yes, please.
All right, hold on. This is like the old school phones where you patch cables to lines.
Hello.
Hi, Lisa. I have you on speakerphone with the full joint commission. They have a proposal for you. Will you hold, please?
Okay.
All right, here it comes. Go ahead.
I don't, Lisa, I don't think the people in the chamber is comfortable with you coming to the meeting, so we need to figure out a phone.
I can put her in the conference room and I can sanitize it afterwards, so. There'll be a slight.
Hello, it's my car again. I was on my way out the driveway.
Oh, did you hear the proposal?
What is the proposal?
The proposal is that they'll make a space for you in the conference room.
I don't know. if
So
we
you're
should
not
do that.
with the full body.
How will I hear it?
I believe the Jen will be able to have the system in the conference room up and running for you. Is that
I
Okay.
want to make sure everyone is comfortable with that. This is a public meeting. Counselors, how do you feel?
I'd prefer that she do it through the phone.
Yeah, I would
Is there no way to make the technology work? I mean, does
Yeah, I don't understand.
She was able to do it during the executive
she have a
session.
computer?
Yeah, and then when I kept doing *6 during this meeting, it didn't work.
maybe one idea is maybe Jen, why don't you reach out directly to Lisa and walk through, maybe send a new link directly to her and try that. It might have to do with, two Zoom sessions being stacked on one another. I'm not sure.
Yeah, Lisa, I'll resend you the
On
link
speakerphone.
for the meetings. And it would be the same process of what we did last time. And maybe it was just maybe.
There was no number. There was only a number for Tacoma and San Jose. There was no other number.
But you can use any number.
No, it's just.
Okay, so I dialed the number, I put in the meeting number, I put in the passcode, I put in all the things, and it let me join, and then it said you're muted, so I did *6 and it made no difference. I did *6 about 3 or 4 times.
*6
*6
*6
Oh, I didn't do *6 no.
Well, let's try that.
Okay,
Okay, I'm gonna go back to my house.
okay. Good luck.
Grab my car.
Okay. So we'll
Okay, we're
hold
gonna
for
go
you.
ahead and continue with the meeting. Okay, so we are here tonight to talk with the Planning Commission, Design Review and City Council on our housing and
And a lot of other things too.
okay,
Thank you.
welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks for your patience, everyone.
Thanks. We're gonna go over, if possible, 4 items on the agenda. It's a mix of things, and I just go over them briefly and see if you would rather they be rearranged. But first, I wanted to say that at the very top of the agenda, I put in a list of the things that we've accomplished under the Code Rewrite project so far. And I think it's worth applauding that progress. We have reorganized the code, and that is an adopted feat. We have an adopted wetland overlay. We have housing policy amendments underway. I think we're making progress on those. And we also have a number of code maintenance items, including short-term rental provisions relocation. So this is a significant amount of progress that we've made. I just want to make sure we appreciate that. The 4 items on the agenda are to review the housing code amendments, specifically an overview of where in the code we will be changing things and what we're changing them to. And this will cover a reminder about where we came to out of the housing charrette. Another item is to discuss the maintenance amendments that amongst those
our short-term rental relocation to business section, but there are also enough, a few other clerical and administrative type of amendments that we're going to undertake in the next month. I would also like, having Alyssa here means that we can talk about the vacancy tax options and the paper that she prepared. And then lastly, I'd like to work on scheduling planning commission session, 1 or 2 work sessions in August where we can refine the housing package and the maintenance items. So are there any, is there any desire to rearrange the items on that agenda, or shall we stick to that order?
Can I ask, just a small question? As item 1, will we have public benefits?
I want to talk about what form that takes, yes.
Good, okay, thank you. I'm fine with it. I think you should start with that.
Okay, so I'm seeing general nodding and agreement that we start with the housing code amendments. If we could, please pull up the agenda, the packet. And I'll go through this. I know it's hard for members of the public to read this, but this is in the packet available on the city's website. The amendments that came out of the housing charrette include this is a list of them. Then in a moment, I'll show you where in the code we're going to be making the changes to enact these. Reducing the floor area ratio to 0.35 for 1 unit and 0.5 for 2 units. And as a reminder, the existing floor area ratio is 0.6, producing about on a 5,000 square foot lot. We will be reducing the parking requirement to 1 per dwelling unit for housing that meets affordability targets. And the affordability targets that are under discussion are 2 dwelling units. For developments consisting of 2 dwelling units, 1 unit must be affordable to those earning no more than 80% of the area median family income, which is workforce housing. Permit on-street parking to count when meeting parking requirements for housing that meets those same affordability targets. Allowing dormers to be exempt from the floor area calculation, although the height limit will not change. And we will need to work with staff to refine the code language on habitable and non-habitable space. We're going to eliminate the accessory dwelling unit size requirements for primary and accessory dwelling units, basically eliminating the difference between primary and accessory, simply allowing 2 dwelling units to be the same size as long as they meet other requirements for height, setback, and floor area ratio. We'll simplify the lot coverage calculation. We will allow by type 1 procedure, the reduction of front and rear setbacks by 5 feet. And we will eliminate or waive parking requirements for housing which meets affordability targets downtown. The affordability targets for downtown are far from set. This requires a lot more discussion. And then through the short-term rental amendments, new dwellings would not be, or sorry, through these amendments to the housing sections of the code, we will also make it plain that new dwelling units are not eligible for short-term rental licensing. So those were the sort of by right amendments that we proposed out of the housing charrette. I'll move to downtown mixed-use sites. We are going to allow options for meeting current landscaping requirements, not on the horizontal surface, but vertically, because we found that that was one of the items that made it difficult to get any housing. On Hemlock, we discussed allowing a 3rd story within a dormer, allowing residential-only buildings behind courtyards at the rear of the sites.
Excuse me, it's hard to hear her. Her voice is going this way. And when you're speaking quickly, it's hard to catch what you're saying.
Why don't you move up to the front?
Did I speak to on the podium?
If you want to stand at the podium, you can, and then we can kind of angle you.
Thank you.
Please let us know if you can't hear after she starts again.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So I'm on, can you hear better now?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Downtown, eliminate or waive parking requirements for housing, which meets affordability targets, eliminate density restrictions. And again, clarify that new dwelling units are not eligible for short-term rental licensing. So the next part of the packet goes into which sections have been identified for proposed amendments. It's just a listing. I won't go through that completely. Now I'm going to move into the next section, which talks about where we're changing the definition to simplify coverage. That will be a specific amendment. And in definitions of land use types, we'll be deleting accessory dwelling land use type. We'll be amending dwelling duplex or two-family section to allow two dwelling on all lots in any configuration, stacked, attached, or detached. The transient rental occupancy section will be amended or deleted, coordinating that with the housing amendments. Same with vacation home rental occupancy. So these are 4 definitions that are going to change. And I'll talk about one more land use change before I talk about the concept of public benefits, because I can see that Mike here asking for that. The goal here is to consolidate R1 and R2 into a single zone because they are exactly the same right now, except one allows duplexes and the other does not, but we're eliminating that difference. And the proposal on the bottom of page 5 is to include a much more robust purpose statement about this new singles residential zone that talks about housing which meets the needs of a variety of age and economic groups. This is language that we will need to wordsmith for a purpose statement, but it basically, the intention is to state that this zoning designation implements the comprehensive plan. Now the concept of public benefits has come up, and I want to address how the manifestation of that in this, now we're getting to specific code amendments. We are trying to make a base zone that works by right for middle housing. And we're trying to make it easy to do housing that you want, smaller housing, smaller FAR, multiple units on one lot by right. A public benefit, I think, would only enter the picture when we want to get an additional exchange, a give or a get in addition. At this point, I would like to consider a base zone that establishes a baseline for the need for the housing that we have been hearing is missing in Cannon Beach. And an example of an additional public benefits might be that you get additional FAR above beyond the FAR that we ratcheted down to. You get more if you do something. The public benefits for that would need to be established, but what we've talked about in the past is you would get additional FAR if you preserved a cottage or you preserved some trees. Does that answer your question?
It does kind of, it doesn't answer the people. We're concerned about trees blocking our needed housing, and part of the public benefit, part of the give was for the housing we need. You know, a duplex that, you know, meets our requirements, one of which is rented long-term, the other which cannot be rented short-term. We would come up with a simplified process to deal with things like trees. And the simplified process would give the community development group the discretion step outside some of the requirements that we've established for trees, such as having to pay if you can't replace a tree, or actually even having to redesign your redesign your house because there's a significant tree. We'd forgive that. The tree could come down. And I'll discuss that, if it's the efficient use of the property. And secondly, the owner would not have to pay the tree fine. The 1,000 if they can't replant a tree, 4,000, whatever it happens to be, for a significant tree. And in that way, we feel like on one hand, we've established, we're protecting our trees for the bulk of our developments here. But for the housing that we all agree we need, we're willing to go back to a situation where all that needs to be verified is the city arborist comes in the pre-planned meeting or whatever it happens to be and certifies that, given the goals of the zoning ordinance that we've established, he or she believes that we've made the most use of the property for purposes of planting or retaining trees. And at that point, we move on. And that's how the proposal would work. And it would, as I said, give us the ability to protect the trees across the vast number of our properties where a person, an applicant isn't interested in delivering middle housing or affordable housing. There's some definitional issues there that we can clarify, but, and we also then believe that we can give up a little of the restrictions we have on trees. And I wanted that to be clear for people in the audience who are concerned that trees are getting in the way of housing. They won't, not the kind of housing we need.
I appreciate everything you're saying about the tree ordinance or the public benefit. I haven't been involved in the tree ordinance. I do think it's extremely related to the housing, but I'm not sure if we need to resolve the tree ordinance before we can resolve the housing.
No,
amendments.
no, we don't.
I just want to say one more thing, which is that
It would be great if we could do
tree
it.
ordinance worked the way the wetland ordinance does, which I don't know how it works or where it stands, but the wetland ordinance allows you to build on your property, but you have to show through various steps that you have considered every other option.
That's exactly what the tree says.
Then if the tree ordinance works that way, personally, I don't think that you're going professionally. I don't think that you need to have a public benefit provision unless you're going to give additional bonuses in exchange for something else. But the goal.
No, there will be other bonuses. You mentioned them. There are the bonuses on floor area ratio. There are the bonuses on third story dormers. There's bonuses on parking. I mean, there's a whole list of incentives.
I think those bonuses, those are by right built into the base zone. That's what these amendments represent.
See, that's, I think, then there's a fundamental disconnect between what you're saying and I think what we've discussed. And I don't disagree that there are a couple people who would side with that position, but I also agree that there are a handful of people in the room who have sat through those meetings and would say that's not what we discussed. It's not what we've ever, and nobody in the room, I've heard at least one person say, I would never do that. I would be violating my principles if I did that. So, by right, there are things that we can do. It's not that full list because again, there have been concerns that we're giving away too much and not getting enough. Now you put in that we need, it's all conditioned upon affordable housing, but without public benefits, we have no way of getting to that where we condition an individual's right to build something that's a little bit more than the code allows and giving away our trees. So that I feel, Marcy, that there's a disconnect here.
I think I may share Mike's concern from the standpoint that being a vacation town, if we were to completely say by right, density goes up, I think we're just making middle second homes as opposed to middle local people living in homes.
Affordable.
whether we call it affordable or whatever we want to call it. My concern would be that if we make it easy to build more units and we're not very thoughtful about the limitations we put on building more units, we're simply making cheaper second homes, more affordable second homes instead of affordable homes for people who we know live and work here. So I think that would be my concern with a whole scale. Let's just change it so that there can be more density. I would want to see that linked with some indication that that will be used for people who live and work here, or only able to be sold to people who live and work here, whatever that might be.
Clay has his hand up. So Clay, did you want to say something?
Hi, I'm gonna introduce Lisa again. She tried again from home. She couldn't do it, so she's on the line. I'm gonna do my best to get her near the microphone. So here's Commissioner Kerr.
Yeah, I was part of all of the charrette. And my understanding from the charrette is that all those changes are tied to public benefits. Not one of them, I don't understand, Marcy. We didn't come to a consensus on that idea at all. There were three of us who were very concerned about all of these ordinance changes being tied to public benefits. And now we're right back where we began with you proposing that they aren't all tied, that just a few of them are. And there were a couple things that I know that there was not consensus on, and that was the idea of allowing 3 stories downtown. And I also know that there was no consensus on requiring new construction to meet minimum density of 2 units. So I don't know if you have those still on the table because I'm not there in person. I can't see what you're presenting, and I couldn't hear most of it. But I just want to make it clear that I agree totally with what Mickey just said. I think that was Mickey. I'm not really sure. And I think that there was half of the group that wanted to see all of these changes tied to public benefits. And I think that you're not taking into account the price of property in Cannon Beach, and that people will build 2 houses and they will not build middle housing. They'll just build 2 houses, and and they'll both be very expensive, and it'll just be more vacation homes. So I am totally against proposal unless it's tied to public benefits. Did you hear me?
Yes, thank you, Lisa. We heard you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Well, I completely disagree.
Yeah.
I thought we did when Kevin came in with a specialist, that we all voted and we were all in agreement of having the FAR smaller and then giving back what FAR as a incentive. And I thought that we all understood that a dormer was, because I think there's people here that have they left that actually live downtown in a dormer. It's actual. So having more density will supply more options for people to live. There's people in here right now that live in small apartments. Small apartments are usually cost less money. So having more density is actually the answer. And I thought that we agreed upon that when Kevin was here, and we all raised our hand. And I feel like, I guess I got confused, but.
Yeah, it's probably a fair statement, but what I will say, that there's a disagreement, that there was not a meeting, that's a fair statement. What I will say is we've spent the last 3 weeks talking nothing about public benefit. So this idea that somehow, these are changes by right all of a sudden ignores the fact that we actually had a proposal down on the table. We've gone so far as to at least block it out logically. I was surprised, frankly, that didn't even show up in the agenda.
Are you talking about your inclusionary housing?
Yeah.
Thing? Okay. Well, I thought that was just like we were working on it or whatever.
That's exactly what we're talking about here, working on that. Public benefits, it's the same thing.
Yeah.
Okay, Steve?
Yeah, I don't have a real argument one way or the other, but I thought we came to a consensus on many of the issues as well. And I know there was discussion back and forth, not saying it was right. We were going to have more. I don't know that what you gave us, Mike, we discussed, but I don't know that it was necessarily that everyone was on board. So I just want to be here for Marcy's perspective
Oh.
to say, hey, I agree with what she's brought to everyone's attention, that these were things that were discussed and everyone raised their hands. But obviously there was more discussion that needed to be had, but I just
Yeah.
wanted to voice my opinion. on that.
Not suggesting Marcy did anything wrong. Thank you,
No,
Steve, for
yeah.
clarifying. It was just an honest misunderstanding, I think, because there are a lot of people here that would go in and say, yeah, we can do that, but I'm not willing to sacrifice resources unless we get guarantees. And I know I was there. I know Lisa was there. I suspect Chet was there. And so, hey, we are where we are. Now we have two proposals. One is you get all this by right, and somehow we'll magically figure out how we make it limited to affordable housing because we have no mechanism. Or we start slowly, as our comprehensive plan suggests, and we start with public benefits and see what we can motivate over the next year by incentive. Get 5, 10. I mean, we talked about earlier, what is our goal? I think the high was it 300? Michelle, you wanted to see 300 houses right away. The low was 10 to 15 a year. That's really realistic in terms of what we're trying to achieve.
Well, I think that also with how it's proposed was with the vacancy tax and with the limited STRs, that will actually end up making it harder for people to have their second $1 million condo or whatever that they short-term rental out. Like a lot of people can't have their second home if they're not Airbnb it. So with these other provisions, we're taking things away from people that are just using it as a business. And having the vacancy tax, what I read through, and I've been pushing this for a couple of years, I think really will help. And I think limiting the STRs really will help.
Mhm.
And having this laid out, how she laid it out, seems like a really, really good start, in my opinion. I mean, I'm just on the other end here.
No, you know,
That'd be the first time that I went forward with what I thought you'd agreed. What
I agreed.
me to do, and then I'm told that that was not what you meant, but I'd like to go back and say that at the housing charrette, we talked about middle housing. We talked about the housing that you're getting in Cannon Beach right now is very large. You have an FAR that's very large, and you don't get anything in return for it, and you're not getting affordable housing, and you have no limits on short-term rentals or second homes. You're getting, Melissa explained that the housing that you have in the cities house would fulfill your housing needs, but it's not available for living.
Thank you.
So we talked about, like, one of the key pieces of this legislation is to reduce the floor area ratio, to encourage more small compact housing, more of what we talked about at the charrette as middle housing, which is not a large single dwelling on a single lot, nor an apartment. It's all the housing that's in between. It's duplexes, triplexes. But we settled on duplexes. We settled on, let's have 2 smaller units by right, rather than one very large unit. Let's ratchet down the FAR. The understanding of the charrette was that that would be a legislative change. Then we also said we would reduce parking and allow on-street parking to count toward the parking requirements. Later, when people, I think, began to have doubts about, were we giving up too much? We backed out of the parking, and that's where the parking is now. You only get the parking reduction or the parking allowances to use on-street spaces if you provide, if of the 2 units that you're providing, one of them is affordable. That's built into this legislation. That's a public benefit that's built in, the way I see it. It's very specific. Additional public benefits could be granted for additional FAR or additional things, but those are not, we haven't discussed specifically what those are yet. This is a specific proposal for housing that I think hits the middle. It's not exactly what we said at the housing charrette, but it backs off on the parking. And yet it requires that you provide an affordable unit.
Marcy, I'm a little surprised that you would say this is the first you've heard of it, because I sent you a note last Tuesday and I didn't get a reply, but I don't want to get into that discussion. What I want to do is say, we all have two proposals. We have one that might give you a lot of housing and not what you want, maybe a few units. It'll be helpful for Michelle. Or you get one that gives you fewer housing and all of it is what you want. You need to decide how we go about. That's ultimately what the decision we need to make is.
Tim?
It concerns me when I realize I've been through Tonry. But I thought he made some really excellent points. I don't agree 100% with what he said. But I thought we had some very impassioned presentations from the public. And none of this sounds like it's really moving the needle. And if we play around at the margins here, I'm going to be super disappointed in this because we have the opportunity to do something meaningful. You know,
Are you suggesting?
hold on, let me just finish.
Mike,
We
call on you.
We talked about parking for upstairs units built on top of businesses. What a slam dunk that idea is. And, you know, and the whole downtown parking issue of we get the pot shop if everything burns down or we have a tsunami or whatever, we get all this strip mall parking out in front. Why isn't that the very first thing that we consider as a code amendment? Because we don't want what that current code gives us. So, you know, let's think about getting from here to a point where we're actually accomplishing something. You know, if you want to have, it's going to be very difficult to regulate private individuals to, not saying it can't be done, but regulate private individuals to build affordable housing. But if you really want affordable housing, the RV park is kind of the payload. You'll get that done and you have control over it because you own the property.
That's one of my questions too. It seems like we're actually giving up a lot. If it's tied specifically to affordable housing. So we're asking duplex owners to make sure that, number one, that they're renting and making sure that they're meeting the affordability targets. That's surprising to me that we would be expecting that much from a duplex owner.
May I respond to that? Anybody can build a duplex and they can do whatever they want. If you have public benefits and you want to take
A
it,
public benefit, if it's affordable.
It's a duplex and you want relief from parking. If you want to only have one parking space required, or you want to be able to count on-street parking, only in that case would you be required to prove that one of your units is for 80% or lower.
under your proposal, under public benefits, there are a number of things.
So
One at a time.
reduce parking requirement to 1 per dwelling unit for housing that meets affordability targets,
Yes.
rather than requiring 2. Is that?
Under the current code, you would require 4. Someone who has, you require 2 parking spaces per dwelling unit. We're talking about increasing the number of dwelling units on a site to 2. Basically, taking the accessory dwelling unit provision and just saying, it doesn't really matter if it's smaller, larger, you can do 2. But in that case, you would have to provide 2 parking spaces per each dwelling unit, 4 parking spaces. It means probably you're not going to see any duplexes at all, because that's a lot of parking, especially if you can't count on-street parking. These are all things that we discussed at the housing charrette. But I think, and you talked about eliminating the parking requirement for duplexes. But people had second thoughts after the charrette, so we put this back in as as a public benefits provision, if you provide one affordable unit, you get a break on the parking.
Is it,
However, if you build, sorry, just to be clear, if you build a duplex and you put all the, and you can find a way to accommodate all the required parking on site, there's nothing to prevent you from building that duplex.
I have a question just about, it says for developments of 2 dwelling units, 1 unit must be affordable to those earning no more than 80% of the area median family income. So it doesn't say, it says 2 dwelling unit, doesn't necessarily mean a duplex, right?
On a single lot would be by definition a duplex.
But that's not exactly what it says. But the other question I have, are you talking for sale or for rent? Huh?
Which?
Well, I'm just reading the very beginning of middle housing
It's
and
the second bullet item, isn't it? Reduce parking requirements, and it's the second sentence.
it's the second sentence.
Yeah.
So I guess okay, so the question is are we just talking duplexes or are we talking single family homes on one lot?
We're talking duplexes here.
Okay, so maybe that's what it should say.
And that's, sorry, excuse me, that's what it does say in the code amendments language.
And then so then are you talking about for sale or for rent?
It doesn't matter.
Okay, so so if it's for sale, then the person selling it is going to have to determine or make sure somehow that the buyer is meeting the 80%. And if that buyer begins earning more money, so that it's beyond the 80%, then what happens?
These are issues that need to be worked out, but this was what we arrived at after the charrette as a form of public benefits. Some members of the committee had concerns that we were giving up too much, we were giving away too much, and we needed to tie these changes to specific definitions of affordability. So this is the language, the draft language at this time. It needs work. We do need to figure out how is that administered? How is it maintained? For how long? What is the lease agreement? Or, these are all, it's not like some cities don't do this. It is done. It would be unusual for a small city like Cannon Beach.
It seems like, oh, sorry.
I was just wondering, does it make more sense to tie it to AMI or does it make more sense to tie it to being a full-time resident and someone who works here? Because it seemed like from some of the audience comments, some of the concern was getting kicked out or having your rent raised just because your income went up. So, or do we increase AMI to say 120%?
The short-term rental and the fact that it can't qualify as a short-term rental was intended to close that loophole.
Okay.
How does that happen? Yeah.
You're doing a great job, but I want to.
No,
Thank
that's
you.
good.
So I want to just follow up on this conversation we're having, because I think when we started this housing task force, everyone agreed that we needed more housing for people who live and work here, regardless of their income level. I personally got confused early on and thought that by building middle housing and waiving parking requirements, we would build exactly that. We would build more housing that people who live and work here could afford to either own or to rent. And so we all raised our hand. We thought this sounds great, more density, smaller units. And then we started trying to run the numbers and think, well, someone who lives and works here can't necessarily afford to buy the lot and tear it down and build a duplex, right? That's a very expensive development proposition. And so we started to worry, a subset of us, at least in the committee, started to worry that what we were actually doing was just allowing duplex vacation homes. Even though we're closing the loophole in short-term rentals, there are plenty of people who can afford to buy from out of town, who can afford to buy a lot here, tear down a tiny cute cabin in the presidentials, build a duplex, not rent either one of them because they don't need to, and just have one for the in-laws, one for themselves, come a couple weeks a year. And so that's where we started talking about a vacancy tax. Unfortunately, Alyssa is here and has done a lot of research. And so I proposed an 80% AMI was something maybe that was on the table very early. It actually was a surprise to me to see it in the packet. It was not what we discussed at the end of the work group. We had Mike and Lisa and I have been hammering on, we need some kind of way to assure that these new homes and ADUs and duplexes are gonna build needed housing for people who live and work here. The vacancy tax is one way to do that. AMI might be a way to do that. I think 80% is too low. I think it would have to be 100 or 120 to capture the population that we're trying to help. But I think that's where we left it, and there was some disagreement. Some people didn't want to put a limit on it, but I worry if we just allowed duplexes outright, talking about essentially all zones, right? R1 and R2 get combined, so it's throughout town except for on the hills, you can build a duplex. I was a vacation homeowner, and I was looking at return on investment. I would buy a little cottage in the presidentials and I'd tear it down and build a duplex, and then I'd resell it for twice as much to another out-of-town vacation homeowner. So I think that's the concern. So what we're trying to do, what Mike's trying to say with public benefits, how can we are going to increase density. How can we make sure we do it in a way that helps the people who want to live and work here full time? They can be rentals or they could be ownership. But I feel like it needs to be one of those two. It can't just be an easier way to double your money on a vacation home.
And I say amen to that, what he said.
I do too.
Lisa's back. Did you want to say something?
No, what he said, I'm.
Oh, okay.
I just don't think you're going to be encouraging the two dwelling units. Maybe it is.
Tell me why, Gary. I want to know why. Why does giving no parking requirements?
The
floor area
hiring that a homeowner who wants to build an ADU, a duplex, strapping them to, okay, now we have to, we go by these affordability.
No, we're getting rid of my proposal is you don't look at AMI at all. You say it needs to be rented long-term or occupied more than 180 days a year. And that's the foundation of the vacancy tax, right? Someone needs to be occupying this home. It's not just vacant.
Chet, could it be with regard to duplexes only, the vacancy?
That's how we're proposing to roll it out, is that you would sign, if you want to build a duplex in this zone, you need to sign up that at least one of those two units will be occupied 180 days a year.
It makes a ton of sense.
For how long?
Yeah, and how's it enforced?
There are debates. Alyssa, do you want to talk about enforcement? Alyssa's got a whole 10-pager on how to enforce.
Some staff.
Yeah, we're gonna use that money and we're gonna hire more staff to get people out there, checking doors, doing what it needs. I got an issue with the whole administration of everything we're speaking about.
I know you do, but you can look at meters, you look at utility meters to see if units are being used. There are ways to do it cheaply. There is enforcement, but it should generate enough income that it pays for itself and creates a budget that then you can go and build that affordable housing. Wherever that might be. Maybe you subsidize it in Seaside, maybe you do it in the RV park, but you create the vacancy tax, then creates revenue to actually pay for the affordable housing. And that's where you could help people say 80% and below.
So if somebody actually wants a mother-in-law unit, they just have to sign a rental agreement?
They are actually going to rent it to somebody who lives here. Right? Like you do with your duplex. I mean, I'd love to hear your positive vibes on a duplex. What works well for you having a duplex? It helps, as I understand, it helps people pay the mortgage on the house that they own. It also houses someone else who lives here full time. It seems like a win-win to me. But
it is.
We need to tie that to some kind of.
The affordability thing is mainly what I'm reacting.
Sure. I know I'm proposing we don't have a.
Gary, I think it's problematic. I live in a duplex. There's my neighbor over there. And I don't want to have to prove that I turn in paperwork to make it affordable for.
Or move if you happen to make more money.
Yeah, or move if I have to make more money or whatever.
I would question myself being tied into a full-time rental because, it could be a mother-in-law, a senior situation. And we need all kinds of housing here. We need every kind of housing except the one kind of housing we've got, which is second homeowners. So I understand you're trying to address that concern, but we need market rate rentals.
They would all be market rate rentals.
We even need houses, that aren't just the multi-million-dollar or billion-dollar homes.
That's exactly what we're trying to do. That was the whole purpose of this charrette.
So,
And
so
that-
much of the discussion around the vacancy tax wasn't, a lot of the discussion we're having tonight is around rentals and renting it, but it's also someone just living in the home full-time. Whether they're paying you rent or whether it's a mother-in-law that's living there or an elderly cousin or whatever. They're living there full-time, being in the thing that then means they don't have to pay you don't have to pay the vacancy tax for it being empty. Whether it's they're paying you or they're staying there for free. But if they're there long-term.
Well, Alyssa's paper on this was brilliant.
It was.
I might say.
Yeah.
And, some of it goes to Steve and being able to monitor some of that stuff. And yeah, I mean, we can look at utilities, but I think you want to respond.
Well, I'm interested in this discussion because I've dipped in and out and was at some of the charrette and heard some of the discussion. And it strikes me that, actually, Chet, I think you said it well, which is there was an objective by making these code amendments, and it was what we want to build. I think there's two questions you're trying to solve is what do we want to build, and then for whom do we want to build it? And different tools in public policy accomplish different things. I think what Marcy is talking about is the what you want to build, right? You're solving for, we're building houses with too big of a footprint. And on a dollars per square foot basis, those will always be expensive. So if you build smaller footprint housing on a dollars per square foot basis, they will be less expensive, even if they cost the exact same dollars per square foot to construct, right? And so by that, you are just changing the urban form of your community to have smaller houses or more houses on the same size lot. To me, that is something that I've heard you all say that that's an objective you want to have. We don't want to build just big houses that cover the whole lot. We want to have smaller footprint. So that's the what you want to build, right? We don't want to build as much parking. We want to be able to have flexibility to add density in a way that doesn't disrupt the downtown. So to me, you have articulated clearly what you want to build. And I feel like these are tools that speak to the what. And then the for whom, I think, is the other question. And you never make public policy like one tool at a time, right? They all have to intersect together. And I think that's what you guys are trying to do is link multiple public policy goals of what you want to build and who you want to build it for. And so I think that's kind of the question of once we're enabling smaller housing to be built, then how do we make sure it's serving the people we want to serve? And there are a different set of public policy tools around deed restrictions, vacancy taxes, short-term rental restrictions. And I think that's the art that you guys have here is marrying the what and the for whom and not letting the baggage of one weigh down the other. And I think that's what I'm seeing is, so to me, these are good things you want to do, but you don't want to do them without doing the other part. And so don't let one hold back the other, I guess I would say.
We're all quiet.
I mean, that was kind of my understanding of going through this, that was our objective is come up with what we're going to do here. And then separately come up with what we're going to do policy wise, the council come up with what they're going to do policy wise. And then roll out essentially at the same time. That way it's not housing for 5 years getting built and then a policy change coming through, changing it. So this is getting closer to getting ourselves as close as we can to finished on the legislative portion of these changes while still having that conversation of how those changes are going to affect, which is, yeah, that was my understanding of what this whole thing was about. Yeah, I think it's just important for council to hear that just making the policy change, just allowing duplexes may not solve the problem of creating needed housing. There needs to be in parallel, I would put it in the code, and I think that's what when Mike talks about public benefits, there are examples of city code that have public benefits provisions. If you want parking waivers, you either make it affordable or you make it occupied long-term, whatever you want to use as that hook to make sure it's the kind of housing that you want to build. So I worry a little bit about finishing a code revision that just says duplexes in all zones. That's right. And then we have to come back and layer in some way to incentivize people to rent those long-term or occupy them long-term. I feel like we have a real opportunity here to roll out something like a vacancy tax just on the newly allowed duplexes. Right, then you're not trying to pass a tax on everyone who owns a home here and deal with the legal challenges. You say if you sign up to get FAR givebacks and free parking and more density or 2 units on your lot, you also sign up that one of those is occupied long-term. And it's a way to test out that vacancy tax on a small number of units, right? 10 to 15.
Are you saying just doing a vacancy tax on just new construction?
Just on the newly allowed density.
Duplex.
Just on the newly, well, ADUs, but whatever it is that the code changes.
It's not.
And then, let me finish, Michelle, and then if it's successful, you can gradually expand it to all homes.
I feel like this is an awesome opportunity to implement a vacancy tax. We could really, Cannon Beach could be an example to other vacation towns and to Oregon and the whole entire coast. I mean, I wanted, like, read a ton about this, and she just did a huge amount of work, and it's amazing. And I feel like let's just nitpick at it. It's gonna slow it down.
I would love to roll it out townwide, but I think you're gonna be in court for 5 years over it, right? With all the second homeowners that own property here, it's gonna take a while to implement it. This way, you can actually start to implement it with each new duplex that's built. You have some guarantee that, yeah, we allowed a duplex where there used to be a cute little cottage, and we at least know someone's living there full time. And if not, we're getting some revenue that we can do affordable housing with. I agree. It's
Are we moving to the vacancy tax agenda item?
I don't know, where are we?
We should talk about the vacancy tax. Because it's being discussed as a policy move that needs to go along with the zoning code. So I would say move this up on the agenda. If that's okay.
Yeah. Go ahead. Hey, Marcy, can I ask a question? It wasn't clear to me from what I read here, whether you're going to take the design review board review of duplexes and ADUs out.
Yes, it is actually against.
Harmonizing it with state law.
Yes.
Yes, thank you.
It's a state law.
As it should be.
Okay, so we're going to talk about vacancy tax.
Okay, well, I guess I will.
You want to stand up here? Your voice is not better than mine, but.
Can everyone hear?
I'm gonna start by talking loud and see if it works. Okay. I guess I will start by responding to the question that was asked by Michelle and that continues the dialogue essentially. And I think it goes back to the same question, which is, what do you think you're going to accomplish with a vacancy tax? What is the goal, right? And in the research that we all have now, there are multiple goals. One is to try to get more empty houses full of people, right? One is to generate money by taxing people with empty houses to do something with that money to provide housing. And so I think that that's an interesting question for what you're saying is, if we start with just the new construction, just newly allowed density, are we actually creating more rentals that are going to be on the market than otherwise would have been on the market without the vacancy tax, right? And so maybe, and so to your point though, we already have quite a few vacant homes. And I think actually this would be part of the next steps I recommend, which is kind of analyzing the impact. How many homes do we have? If we were going to charge tax, how many people would pay it? Sort of get a lay of the land in terms of what the impact is. But I would tend to lean toward you would want to implement it more broadly because you already have housing stock that is sitting vacant. And if the goal is to make those empty houses more full, then you would want to use this policy tool to try to move that needle. I don't think that that precludes making some kind of tax link to entitling more density, more development, right? And saying, really, it's the same thing. If you have to prove and certify that you'll be occupying it 180 days, whether it's an existing house or whether it's a new house. And if you're going to do it in a new house, there might be a carrot, right? That will allow you to get something that you wouldn't otherwise get. That is a different treatment than we already have 200 empty houses sitting in the city that we would like to try to see if we could incent more people to use them full time. So both things can be true at the same time, but I would actually think you would be more legal challenged by singling out a group of property owners than trying to do a broader application. But I am not an attorney and there are plenty in this room.
Yes, there are.
And so I guess that's the main thing I wanted to say about the vacancy tax, right? You guys have 10 pages of text you can read, but the key questions are, again, what are the goals you hope to accomplish with implementing it in terms of, and if you look at how you measure it, there are ways to figure out if you're actually getting more rental homes. I think the other key for you is if you're gonna charge a tax, what is the thing you want to do with it to facilitate housing? Because I think that frankly addresses legal issues, community issues. If you say, hey, we're gonna use it to buy down rents, we're gonna do a rent assistance program for workers in Cannon Beach, and we're gonna have a fund that if an employer comes and certifies or an employee comes and certifies, we'll buy down your rent X $100 a month for X period of time. And then those units, whether they're single family homes, whether they're multifamily homes, now have an agreement in place because you're using the revenue from your tax in order to reduce rents. So again, it's not one public policy tool at a time. It's multiple things that need to work together to focus on the objectives you want to accomplish. So
How, or I guess, how would a vacancy tax apply to short-term rentals?
Well, so the first thing you do in a vacancy tax is define a vacancy. And I think that that's the question that we're going to want to start with, which is it something that is occupied more than X number of days a year? Is it occupied by somebody who has a mailing address in this city or occupied by somebody who doesn't live in the city? Right there. So, and frankly, there are exemptions, right? What if you're remodeling your house for 2 years? That's vacant, right? And so you might want to exempt somebody from that. Or, you're traveling for work, right? There are multiple exemptions that you might want to put in. But I think that's the first question, is defining what we mean by a vacant house. And then I think that starts setting the other decisions out from there.
In the interest of moving this forward along with the zoning code amendments, which I think is what we want to do, what we said we wanted to do. Your page 11 goes through potential next steps. We just talked about what those are.
I don't have them in front of me, can you?
We'll pull them up. Conduct a feasibility study. We talk about assessing local conditions, doing an economic impact analysis. What is economic impact analysis? How big is that?
Well, I think that's, again, we would have to talk to your staff about that, but the idea is essentially conducting an inventory of how many homes of different types that would be likely to be subject to this, and then testing probably a couple scenarios in terms of how you would assess a tax, right? There's different ways, whether you do it, flat or a percent or scale, and sort of figure out how many people does this touch? How much revenue would we generate? What negative impacts might we have to mitigate for if we see that? And then essentially decide. And then I think the other key question is Steve's question around how do we administer it? So are we collecting enough money that we can afford to manage it? Are we going to do a self-reporting where we just let people do it as part of their taxes every year and see how it goes? Are we going to do complaint based? And so I think that's the other economic assessment is, are we going to generate enough from implementing it at whatever level we decide citywide that the program can actually support itself and in theory generate resources to support housing? So to me, that's, I think, the key of an economic impact study. And then, of course, that also gives an opportunity for stakeholder engagement around property owners, business owners, in terms of what they think the impact would be. What else is?
So the next, legal review as part of that,
Right.
Conducting the feasibility study.
Right.
The next step was what you were just talking about, defining vacancy and exemptions.
Right.
There's a third step in here, just stakeholder engagement, community
Right.
consultation and public hearings and workshops.
Right.
If there's anything I got from this, it's like, okay, this is not just you slap a vacancy tax, but this is going to be complicated. There's a lot of moving parts, including, how to monitor it. And I don't know, how long do you think it would take for us to conduct a feasibility study, define vacancy exceptions, get stakeholder engagement, develop tax framework,
It's a good question. Um. I mean, it's interesting, right? I mean, you guys have been having this conversation for a long time just to get to this point, and so, you know, I'm always the optimist, right? Could you do this by the end of the year? Probably, if you wanted to. If all of you guys were on the same page all the time, which doesn't seem like that happens a lot. But that's how you make stuff happen. And so, you know, 6 months to a year.
The feasibility study obviously important because you want to make sure that if we're going to spend this time on it, that it's going to make some kind of difference. And I don't know, I have no clue.
Well, and I think there's an opportunity to test multiple approaches. That's what I would say is, hey, let's see what if we just started with a small group and we did this low rate, how would we generate? If we did everybody and we did the highest rate, what would we generate? And sort of get the parameters of how much you think makes sense, right? Here's the smallest scenario, here's the biggest scenario, here's a moderate scenario that might be an appropriate. I think Chet is on the right track. You want to roll things out in a way that is implementable rather than bite off more than you can chew, but you also want to have enough of a scale that it's worth investing programmatically in the infrastructure you need to have a program that works. We've all been around where you don't follow up enough and then you don't set yourself up for success. So I think we need to look at that.
I would remind everyone that we have $21.3 million in cash, 6 million in debt, 15.3 million of net cash. We are not resource constrained in any way, in any meaningful way right now. And so talking about new ways to make more revenue might be an interesting idea, but I'd love to see something done.
Well, that's Tim, that's assuming that you want to spend all our reserves, a lot of which are for an emergency situation, et cetera. And I believe that at the last budget meeting, we approved those reserves, even though you didn't, but everybody else did. So I wouldn't, the idea of just, you know, jumping into our reserves and spending money, that you say we have it, and I say it's in reserve for in case of some kind of huge emergency.
You're absolutely right. It's a reserve. It's an excessive reserve.
Well, in your opinion, Tim, nobody else on the budget committee agreed with you. You were the only lone voice who said it was excessive on that committee. So, you know.
Fair enough.
Well, I think the money from the taxes is one thing, but there's other things. Moving things to rentals, encouraging sales of those properties that are sitting there. I mean, it's kind of a penalty if you're just gonna sit on it. I guess it comes to your point of we have to decide how we want it to work.
Right. It looks like in other cities, one of the things that has worked is sort of the reducing the speculation of people who say, I'm looking for a place to park my money. I'm going to park it here. Well, maybe we don't want to encourage that and this reduces that. Or, hey, I'm going to tear down a really nice house and build two that I can then rent out. This reduces people who are just speculating. And so I think that might be a goal that you have articulated as well.
Yes, I think that's true.
Okay, everybody okay with moving on from vacancy tax? Vacating it?
What are we moving on to?
Not quite sure.
Back to Marcy.
I'm not sure where we're at.
Where did you leave off, Marcy?
I think it's not clear, I think we need to make a decision or I need direction about moving forward with code amendments. While we know that a vacancy tax may take some time and you'll have to decide whether you want to move forward with that. We do have teed up short-term rentals. We're going to move that into the business section as part of code maintenance.
That's a separate agenda item, but it's just going to be discussion with.
But the idea was to, I'm sorry.
That's a separate agenda item that is just going to be a discussion with the city council after we're done with this other item.
Okay. Okay.
You can speak to, that was just one of the recommendations from the housing focus group, and that's kind of how it relates to that particular item that's on the agenda. So that's how that tied in,
Well, that came from the,
right? That was one of the
okay,
recommendations.
okay.
So
I misunderstood.
that's how it relates.
Okay.
The, you know, there was concern, this was a concern that arose as part of the concerns that people started to have after the housing charrette. We've decided to reduce FAR to write a zoning code that actually produces housing that you'd like to see instead of by default, these large homes that are mostly used for second homes. But we realized that I shared this concern with the members of the committee and also staff that you might see a lot of these duplexes just turn into short-term rentals, and where would that get you? So we needed to work on the short-term rental issue. So we decided to package that up with these housing code amendments to try to do them in parallel so that they come out, they are adopted at about the same time.
I think you'll find 100% support for that.
So that's why maybe that's what we talk about next is how the short-term rental amendments are part of a larger code maintenance package that we'd like to move forward in August, along with these housing code amendments. But before we do that, I guess I do need direction that we continue to hammer out the details of this legislation for the housing code. That we continue to work on that internally. It doesn't sound like this proposal is ready for a planning commission work session. Sounds like it needs to go back to a committee.
I support these housing amendments that you've outlined in the overview. I might have some concerns about them, again, that we might be restricting it too much to not be actually encouraging it, but we're just going to still make it too difficult for people to add housing, but I liked everything I read.
But I think the issue of the public benefit needs to be resolved.
And Chet may be onto it there with, not necessarily the affordable housing thing that concerns me. I just can't imagine that with my duplex where I would have to, manage that whole thing. But requiring a certain amount of occupancy, less of a stretch.
I'd be curious.
When I bought mine, it was a grandfathered in full-time vacation rental. And I converted it to a full-time rental. So I think when you've got the multiple units, I think you were asking this, it may not be what the first owner is looking at, but that second owner, might just see, hey, this is a way for me to make additional income and create a full-time rental.
I think we just need to develop, and I'd love to hear council's input and the other commissioners' input on if we can incentivize these to be long-term rentals. Whether there's an AMI cap on the rental or not. So I think that's, if we do take this back to the housing task force, I'd love to know what the other commissions think. Either are we supportive of that? Is that our goal to build needed housing, or is our goal just to build more boxes to just have higher density with no restriction? That would be helpful to know.
I'm on the council and I'm also on the task force, and my goal is to see more needed housing, not just more housing.
I agree with Lisa.
Well, I think definitely we want to build more needed housing. My concern is that the public, there's just not at the moment enough public benefit to incentivize that needed housing. Taking away saying you only have one parking space, that's not necessarily a huge incentive for somebody to go through all of the ropes that they need to do to get to, needed housing. So I guess my question is, can we provide more public benefit so that somebody does say, yeah, that's what I want to do. I want to go through all these hoops because I want this incentive.
The FAR is definitely incentive to build multiple units.
Yeah, but it's still less than what we have now, and which is fine. I don't have a problem with that, but I still think we need to have more incentives than just parking.
I completely agree with you. And parking is one example. The FAR give back is another example. If it's businesses downtown, it's no parking requirements. If there's a resident above that business, again, hopefully a full-time resident and not a speculator who wants a condo downtown to come visit a few times a year.
But I would come back to, we need all kinds of housing. We talk about needed housing. We could use market rate rentals. We could use homes that cost $599,000. So we kind of need all of that.
Yeah, I agree. We need all of it except for more vacation homes.
Right.
And I'm curious,
Sure.
if anyone here wants more vacation homes? I would love to hear that because I think we would need to consider that in this duplex code revision. But that's where we struggled as a committee, is that we went down this road of just allowing more density. That was,
I don't know, maybe a lot of people like the fact that the house next door to them is not used that often, but we're actually here trying to solve some housing issues. So it's kind of a different.
Exactly. But yeah, I agree. We need more incentives. So we need things to incentivize people to do the development to create that long-term needed housing.
If the new unit is not eligible for short-term rental, does that solve part of the problem?
It might just be a second home that's vacant for 9-10 months of the year.
Yeah, we have,
That's what the vacancy tax is going to address.
I don't know if it'll do enough. You know, looking at your pie chart, over half the homes here are not short-term rentals and they're not full-time owned and lived-in homes. So that means many people are willing to put money into a piece of property that they just go visit on the weekends now and then. So I think that the concern is, will they be willing to pay an extra $3,000 a year to do that? They might be. I don't know.
But we did also talk about that, yes, people might be willing to, but that money could be used for to help someone actually buy a unit or rent a unit, or it could be could help buy land for affordable housing.
And maybe that's pricing the vacancy tax appropriately, but the higher the tax gets, the more legal challenges you get, especially from a constitutional law perspective. So I'm just questioning, what is the benefit ratio of allowing all density on the idea that you're making a little bit of money off of those new units, as opposed to limiting expansion, but being sure that you're getting the most bang for your buck for every new unit that's put in. And it's just, it literally is probably a cost benefit ratio analysis that could be done along with the feasibility study. Just run the dollars.
I think that's a good point. And then, and the percentage, so we have 60% of our total homes are sitting in that boat where they're just sitting on a piece of property. If this transfers 5% of those immediately or within the first 5 years, then we get how many ever homes that comes out to. It's 10, 15 homes that would transfer over into long-term. And that's close to the growth that we initially had talked about of within 5 years, getting 10, 15, 20 homes that are transferring into that sort of thing. And we don't know what percentage would transfer over, but it's kind of coming up with what the parameters, setting that tax dollar amount just high enough that there is a reason for some percentage of that 60% of our homes to transfer over. And then when those homes don't transfer over, when they sell, maybe those will then sell to somebody that isn't willing to pay for the vacancy tax.
Yeah, you know, my conundrum is I just don't see that as actually being a motivator to change housing availability for middle housing. That $1.5 million house is still going to sell for $1.5 million. You might encourage that guy to sell it to someone else, but it's not going to drive the price of that $1.5 million house to 700 or 600.
That's true.
So, you know, I've made a facetious request of this committee that for every, 5 minutes we focus on things that will not matter and will not create more housing? Can we spend a minute on things that will? And I think, vacancy tax might raise a lot of money, but it's not going to change the availability of housing.
Quick question about the vacancy tax. I was looking at how the money is spent. Is there a possibility of, your house is vacant, here's $10,000 if you rent it full time? That would be like a give back, like, I mean, there's a lot of houses, I mean, I think everybody would agree, there's a lot of houses that are old houses that are just sitting vacant for years. Like, nobody even comes for a week. And there are quite a few houses here, and like, if we could contact them and go, hey, this has been in your family for years, here's $10,000, rent it full time. Is that a possibility? Thank you so much.
I mean, that doesn't make somebody a good landlord. And there's that, but I do think that there are programmatic approaches to say, all right, we've collected enough vacancy tax now that what we want to do is target it toward occupancy of the vacant homes that are generating the house. So we're gonna do a teachers rent buy down, and we're gonna offer to everybody who's paying the vacancy tax X thousands of dollars to house a teacher for X number of months when it's not the summer season. And we'll we'll buy down the rent. We'll give you a rent guarantee, right? We do this with rapid rehousing of people experiencing homelessness. Hey, we need to get someone off the street. We're gonna pay the landlord money to get someone in the house, right? And that makes the landlord much more willing to rent the house to someone they might not rent to. And so, yes, there are programmatic approaches where we could use the revenue generated to incent the owners. I do think Tim has a very good point, which is you're not going to take $1 million houses and make them not $1 million houses. But what you can do, right? This is a high rent town, no matter what, whether it's a small house or a big house, the rents are high here. And so one of the ways you could address that is by using your revenue to say, you want to buy down rents. And the way we want to do that is focus on empty homes where we might be able to house people and incent property owners to have more occupancy than they do now. So yes.
Is there anybody on Zoom that has any words of wisdom? Or would like to make any comments?
I'd like to just say that I do agree with Tim that putting a vacancy tax on a $1.5 million home, even adding $3,000 a year to their, making them pay $3,000 a year vacancy tax is not going to make any difference. These folks have a lot of money. $3,000 a year is, for a lot of them is a Starbucks to the rest of us, so I just don't think that, I think that the good thing about the vacancy tax, it would be to generate income for needed housing. But I don't think it's going to make a difference. I really don't think it is as far as the housing market.
I kind of actually disagree. Just from being on DRB and people coming to us saying, we didn't know that there was one just next to Fresh Foods. Oh my gosh, they live in Montana and they didn't know they had to go in front of DRB to get their new siding or whatever. And they're like, well, if we have to do this, we can't afford this. And there are a lot of people that are scraping by to have their luxury second home or whatever. So I think that let's just use those people. They're like, oh, okay, I guess we can't afford this. So it becomes, they have to rent it full time. And then they make money and they can stay at the Stephanie, like I don't think everything's like $1.5 million home. I think there's a lot of like $700 home, $1,000 homes, and there's condos and stuff.
Well,
They're boarded up and they're not making any money, and you're hoping that you get those.
I mean, you could see that like condos becoming rentals, et cetera. We're not just talking about oceanfront $1.5 million homes. We're talking about there's other houses here other than.
Yeah, well, it'd be interesting to have a inventory of that, because I would guess that there aren't as many as you're saying, but I don't know. I mean, I wouldn't know until we had some kind of an inventory done that would show us what that, what the numbers were.
Well, I'm hearing that we keep moving with the housing code amendments, defining those, meeting with the housing committee. Can we talk about the code maintenance items for a bit? It'll be a complete change of topic.
Everybody okay with that?
Is there a next step forward on the vacancy tax question?
I think do some kind of feasibility.
Yes, I mean, is that something that the city can hire someone to do? Or
I'm happy to work with your staff on that. That'd be awesome. Could come up with something. Yeah.
Yeah, I know all about it. My take on this stuff is just like the RV parking stuff we talk about. You gotta hire people that know what, have been involved in this, and have done it. I mean, listen, I can do preliminary stuff, but I mean, this is a huge conversation that we're gonna get sued on first. And second of all, we need like attorneys and the policy. I mean, this isn't just like some 6 month and you have it.
optimist, pessimist.
I would say.
To run the program, you're right.
You have to start something, but it takes the council to put aside the dollars to say it's important enough to do so, to hire the people that are needed to do the job. Yeah. And so budgets have been done already for this year and different things like that. So there's planning that needs to go into budgets and things like that. So this is a much larger discussion than, hey, not saying it's unnecessary. I'm not saying that, but it's gonna take time and a significant amount of energy from people that know it a heck of a lot better than I do.
Yeah.
To propose it to you in a legitimate fashion to say, yes, we can do this. Here's how we do this. Here's the amounts. Here's what we should be doing. It's a large undertaking. And I'm not gonna be able to do it.
We could manage a consultant together. Steve's absolutely right. We're not the people to do it, but we could work with you, find a scope of work. I think the point about finding the resources is a key point in terms of being able to move forward with that. But there are people who specialize in public finance and could conduct this kind of analysis with a scope of work that's agreed upon and
Right.
manage it.
When you look at, you're saying San Francisco, you're saying what, Seattle, the agencies that got money, time, and probably staff. You know, I mean, all the communities that are mentioned are 1 million+ people.
I looked, what's the smallest?
Yeah, I appreciate that. But I'm telling you now, I'm not gonna be able to do it.
Good River.
The smallest communities like Berkeley. Or South Lake Tahoe has tried, but it hasn't been implemented. I think Steve has a good point that bigger cities have more capacity. This would be by far the smallest place in the world that it's ever been tried.
We have plenty of reserves to pay for it, and we don't even have to spend all our reserves.
Tim, what is next?
So at the risk of stepping from one topic to another, but this downtown parking situation. Everybody around this table does not want that code to be the way it is, I think. I mean, I could be wrong. And if we bit off that one little thing and change that, I mean, I was really struck by Aaron Matusik in January or February saying, I got a 6,000 square foot building and I would put 10 or 12 units, I don't remember the number, upstairs in a heartbeat if I didn't have the parking requirement. So I think we would all buy off on changing the parking requirement just because we don't want a strip mall on Hemlock if the whole thing burns down or we have a tsunami or whatever. And there's this ancillary benefit that it's going to create new housing. Why can't we shift the focus to something like that?
But what kind of new housing, Tim? What kind of new housing? Is it going to create vacation rentals or is it going to create?
We've eliminated vacation rentals from the mix entirely.
Okay.
And hold on just a second.
Expensive.
And let's be
Lisa,
clear.
hold on.
Let's be clear. we have exactly the same number of vacation rentals today as we did 10 years ago, and we have fewer than we did 5 years ago. I've done the math. And so creating vacation rentals as the boogeyman here, I know you don't like them, but it just isn't, it isn't the thing that's driving availability of housing. It doesn't. So let's do something that does drive the availability of housing.
But Tim, what kind of housing? Are you going to have expensive condos that middle housing folks can't afford? I mean, it has to be tied to some kind of.
I'm all for I'm all for, you know, Chet's idea of, you know, doing something, either a public benefit or a stick. I don't know which it is. Let's just do something.
Yeah, and we've talked about this, and Aaron and I've chatted about it, and he's working on some ideas. And the question is, what ratio of long-term resident or affordability makes sense for that business owner to pay to build that second story? And, you know, how much of that parking give back is tied to long-term residents or affordability? And we just need to find the right mix, right? Because if we don't tie it all, I think you will get very expensive condos on the second floor, or people just renting them to come visit for a couple weeks a year.
But it's also, you know, let's circle back to we don't want the outcome of the pot shop. We don't want the vacant lot sitting on Spruce Street right now that can't be built on.
Right, I think there's two separate issues. So as I understand it, if a business burns down, they can rebuild exactly as they had it before. I think that's another boogeyman we can get rid of. We have a gorgeous, cute downtown that's ranked like in the top 100 in the whole world or something like that, right? People visit it because there are these cute little wood buildings downtown. So my concern, if we just get rid of parking requirements everywhere, people will buy up those cute little wood buildings, they'll scrape them, they'll rebuild whatever at market rate, whether it has housing above it or not. We have to tie it to housing, number one, right? You have to only have parking give backs if there's some kind of housing built, not just redevelopment. Otherwise we get redevelopment downtown.
All of that.
Okay, right, so good. So it's housing, and the question is what kind of housing? And we've discussed this, it was one of the charrette items. We discussed this at length, and the worry was that people would condoize those second floor apartments. They would sell them for $500,000 a piece, especially the ones that might have a little tiny peekaboo view of the ocean over the business next door. And that would create, again, basically vacation homes.
Can you make a deed restriction, or can the council pass an ordinance that a zoning ordinance that says, no, that cannot be turned into condos? Because I know the city council at one time passed an ordinance that talked about duplexes not being turned into condos.
I think state law actually.
There was a new law, Nancy, that prohibits us from discriminating against condos. We have to allow it.
Discriminating against condos.
Back to page one.
Which one?
I wanted to point that out.
This is
In the plan.
Each one of our packets. And look at the very bottom.
Yeah.
Downtown mixed use
Yes,
site
there.
proposed amendments. And if you could. That's the very beginning of the entire.
Eliminate or waive parking requirements for housing which meets affordability targets.
Eliminate or waive parking requirements for housing which meets affordability targets. Affordability targets under discussion. Okay, so I am told that these were not under discussion, but that's fine. We are looking, let's say that we will put something in this place. Whether it's switching to occupancy requirement or it's affordability targets, we will decide that will be the next job of the housing committee. But the idea here, I want to make sure that, can we move forward with the basic concept here, which is to eliminate or waive parking requirements for housing which meets X targets? Let's decide what those targets are, but in a moment, within the next month. Is that idea a concept that we could move forward with?
Yes.
Yes. I support it.
Yep.
To me, that's not a public benefit provision. That's just the way we write the code. That's a base zone requirement for the downtown zone. It's an amendment that we made.
I wonder if we have a terminology issue here. I think some people are using public benefits simply to mean based on a particular criteria, like affordability or residential. And I think maybe you have a more nuanced definition that is like above and beyond that.
It's a bonus. To me,
And so-
public benefits is a bonus.
Yeah, so I think maybe we have some imprecision in how we're communicating that term.
This would not also be the first time. That's why I kind of think you should leave the code writing to the code writers, but if the concept is what we are trying to achieve, can we move forward with this basic base zone concept?
As long as it has something to do with people living there long term.
We will have to
Don't have
define
to-
exactly what that is. Can that be the next task, the August task of the housing committee?
It's some kind of balance between what Nancy was saying and incentivizing people to add housing and what Chet is saying of, how can we get more desired outcomes? I mean, there has to be some kind of balance there.
Can you help us with that?
When she's finished doing the other thing, which
Oh, yeah, just give me 6 months.
Okay, because then I think that might, I thank you for bringing up the downtown. Just specifically because we haven't addressed it, we've really mostly been talking about the residential sense, but this is really important, and the parking issue downtown is very important.
Well, and what's missing is the whole commercial parking thing that gives us the parking lot out front of small structure. I mean, I don't think that's what people are coming here for.
Fortunately, we were a housing task force, so we didn't.
I know, I understand
Parking.
talking about housing here, but that whole commercial parking is,
Agreed to address downtown parking as it relates to housing for the housing work, but we're going to get to parking next. Yeah, that's supposed to be the next policy. Area that we hit with code amendments.
That's the low hanging fruit, I think.
All right, so can we move to something that's much more mundane, which is the code amendments for compliance? It's a whole package, including short-term rental amendments, and I'd actually like Keith to speak up here. His memo is attachment B, and it's pretty short. It's identified the sections of the code that we're making more minor amendments.
What page are you
yeah,
on?
I'm not sure where we're.
What
Sorry.
attachment B,
I did-
12 of
page-
That's correct.
Page
Actually,
12
Page packet.
of the whole packet, yeah.
Page is it?
12, Marcy.
The email. There's the memo from Keith.
Got it.
So I will just see it up and let him speak more. We're focusing on definitions and clarifications. I think these are not that controversial. We would like to bundle these amendments up with the short-term rental, the move of the short-term rental provisions that are in the zoning code right now will be moved to business. We'll move all together, we're hoping in August, September. Do you have anything else that you would like to, would you want to walk through the list quickly of these?
Sure. So this is Keith Lyden. I'm a subcontractor to Works on this project, and I've been working with a number of you for some time here. While we did the code audit, as we went along, we certainly identified some other issues that we felt needed to be addressed at some point. And what we had recommended to you, as you know, was to first reorganize the code so we had a good structure and organization from which we could then make additional code amendments as we went along. So as Marcy mentioned, as you know, we have the reorganized code adopted. And so we've been talking with the staff about the types of amendments that we should perhaps consider next. And so I put together this list in this memo in attachment B, really with two basic types. One is I would call them simpler types of code amendments that would be related to definitions and clarification. And we have a number of things listed there. One is we have a number of definitions of terms that the staff has found to be problematic or a little confusing or maybe too complicated to address some of those. And let's see, well, let me get to mine here. And then another big one is to talk about the definition of use types. So in your zoning code, you have some use types that you show as permitted or conditional use in different zones. And you have definitions for those, but for the majority, you do not have any uses that you're listing as permitted or conditional in the different zones. And so one proposal would be to just simply define the uses that you are currently allowing or allowing conditionally in the different zones. Then a second one, clarifications and updates. This would refer to things like making sure that the regulatory references that we have in the code are up to date. You may recall we had one ORS citation that was no longer valid because that ORS section had been deleted in the revised statutes and that sort of thing, just to make sure all those are up to date. That should be relatively simple. Another is to clarify the type of review process that you folks are currently using to review land use applications. In some cases, and I've used home occupations as an example, when you look at the home occupations provisions, it's not really clear what review process you use for a type 1 and type 2 home occupation. So it'd just be to simply describe or note what you folks are doing currently as your practice, so that everybody who reads the code, picks it up, is trying to understand it, is clear on what those things do. So we have a number of things that are sort of like that. Just really trying to provide some clarification. This is a very quick summary list. The staff and UrbsWorks have some additional thoughts on a lot of these different ideas there. Then when we go to, excuse me, policy related, staff brought up signs as a, excuse me, problem area. Maybe taking a look at setback reductions, parking, design review, accessory dwellings, short-term rentals, which of course you folks have been talking about tonight. Conditional use, we have a number of things that I think we need to address just in terms of clarity. So for example, we have some conditional uses that have specific criteria in the conditional use chapter, but then you do not find those uses listed as a conditional use in any of the zoning districts. So it begs the question, well, where do these things belong? And then there are some other conditional uses that don't have any specific review criteria. So some of this is really to try to clear up some confusion. And again, I think the emphasis on all of these is to not change what you're doing, but just explain what you're doing. So maybe I'll just stop there and see if anybody has any questions for me.
Question, Marcy, what are you asking for here? For approval of these changes or just to let us know what's on the docket?
I'm asking for approval of going forward with with everything that's in clarifications and updates, and a few of the policy related amendments like accessory dwelling units, short-term rentals, at a minimum, those two, and moving forward with those in conjunction with the housing code amendments.
I don't know how I feel about it, but I would object to moving forward on something like, it's the 6th bullet down under clarifications and updates, consider elimination of long-term rental requirements on triplexes. You know, it feels like some of these were spotted before we got into our housing discussion, and I would like somebody to go through and update the list for, I mean, even the discussion tonight, we can see how difficult, you know, the issues are. So I don't know that I necessarily want to give you carte blanche to go change the things.
Oh, no, I'm not asking for carte blanche to change them. I'm asking for support that we bring a package that's more fully developed to the planning commission in August to work these out. So that they become track change, and they can move on to a track change amendment package.
Okay. And you'll scrub it to eliminate stuff that doesn't make sense anymore. These were.
We would literally show you the text that we're changing to execute.
Oh. But I mean, okay, so consider elimination of long-term rental requirements on limited triplexes. Is that something you really want to go ahead with?
Well, it's in the effort of top to bottom code audit and rewrite that these are simple things. We can take care of these at the same time that we're taking care of the short-term rental. The goal was to package up a bunch of simple.
I'm missing something because we just went through a whole discussion on duplexes with the same basically requirement, whether we use AMI or long-term rentals as our standard.
I personally, I'm not sure what C limited triplexes are. I think they're not a thing anymore, actually.
Okay, so yeah, just scrub the list then. That's great. Because I don't know how to say it, except I don't approve of that 6th bullet.
You don't approve of what? I'm sorry, what don't you approve of?
Of eliminating long-term rentals on triplexes. I don't know what it's.
C limited triplexes, Mike.
Of what?
C,
I don't know what that is, so.
I think that's
That's the
the point
point.
he's trying to make.
I don't know that anybody on staff knows what that is anymore, and if this is still relevant, that would be one of the.
Do they even exist?
Right, we have to, this list is the result of going through that giant spreadsheet.
Right.
That we've shared with you in the past and identifying things that don't make sense, that aren't up to date, that are vestiges of language from the 1970s. Some of these items are things that staff asked be cleaned up. So these, what we consider this list to be simple, non-controversial, non-policy related items, but you will have a chance to review the actual language that we're changing or eliminating before we do it at the planning commission level. But I'm asking if we can go to the planning commission and work on these. There's kind of a step that we go through, you know. I meet with you all about the code rewrite. Sometimes we form a separate committee and we work on an issue like the housing committee, like the wetland or overlay committee. But there are some things I think can go, it's not worth the joint commission's time to review these more minor amendments. So I would like permission to just go to August work sessions with the planning commission.
I would say, yes,
I agree.
because it's gonna go to the planning commission. Right. And eventually we'll get it. Everybody okay with that? Okay.
Lisa?
Lisa, you okay?
Well, what do you mean? No, I'm not okay, but I'm okay with that.
You know exactly what I meant. Are you okay with the direction?
Yes, yes, I am. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. And that's the last item on the agenda, other than scheduling the planning commission hearings, work sessions in August or early September, but we can do that outside of this meeting.
Okay. Anything else anyone would like to discuss in terms of all of this? Anybody online? Okay, so that concludes the joint work session, and so planning and design review are excused. City council, that's.
Oh.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Everybody.
Because I want to run, I like that.
Okay. And I think we're going to see a short break. Recording. It's fun.
This is the executive session, right?
Yeah, you should.
Oh, we still have to talk about it.
Short-term rental.
Rental?
I'll be around.
Mom?
Yeah. And let's look outside, yeah. Oh, clock.
Just listen.
Have you started again? Hello?
So now you can talk. Now you can talk.
Lisa, we'll let you know when we start.
Okay.
Thank you.
Oops, sorry.
We don't have Bruce here, but you're presenting, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Let's go. Oh, okay. Let's go ahead. Okay, we are going to move on to the next item on our agenda, which is the short-term rental discussion. And Steve?
Yeah, I think Marcy touched base on this a little bit. One of the things that the Housing Focus Group had discussed was the possibility of moving short-term rentals from Title 17 zoning to Title 5, which is the business taxes, license and regulations. I can hold off if you'd like.
I just want to make sure Lisa knows we're started.
Oh, yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yep. Oh, yeah. Yep. Okay. Go ahead, Steve. Thank you.
So during those discussions, as Marcy indicated with the housing code amendments, there was some concerns about how those might impact short-term rentals and what impacts that could have. One of the subsequent discussions was that the group thought maybe short-term rentals should be removed from the zoning ordinance and put into section 5 of the municipal code, which is business taxes, license and regulations. And it was the focus group's understanding that many communities in Oregon locate their STRs in more of a business licensing section. And these communities believe that the STRs are more of a business licensing taxing regulation than a land use regulation. So it appears that in many communities, it's best practice to have it in that section. The idea is to remove the STR regulations from the zoning ordinance to the business licensing. Nothing would be proposed to change the substantive language of the STR ordinances. Initially, it would just be relocated from 17 to 5. And eventually, if the council was to make modifications to the STR regulations, they could be considered, and there would be probably there would be less amount of process and procedure involved in looking to make amendments to the short-term licensing or the short-term rentals if it was in that business section compared to the land use section. So one of the things, and we've with the housing group and then with some staff, we've talked to the city attorneys in terms of process and procedure, because we want to make sure if we take it from out of 17 that but that we shortly thereafter, like the same meeting or whatever, create an ordinance that moves it from 17 to 5. So before we move forward with something like that, we just wanted some input from council to see if that made sense, if you guys were comfortable with it. But that was the recommendation from the housing focus group at this point in time, was to make such a change.
And Steve, if I could just add, it was actually initially the idea, I believe, it was Bill Kobiasman first. Didn't he first he first brought that idea up as a way to make it a lot more flexibility in the STR. So we met with him and Marcy, and I mean, not Marcy, I'm sorry, him and Ashley, Bill and Ashley and you and Bruce. And that was the consensus that would make the most sense, because other communities did the same thing as well.
That's how I understood it as well.
Do you see any drawbacks to that?
I don't see anything right offhand. I think the easiest thing is that, as you guys are finding out, when we're doing zoning code amendments, it really takes a process and procedure involved in that, with the hearings and the pop-up notices with Department of Land Conservation and Development and things like that. Whereas this would now just be strictly how you deal with other ordinances in the municipal section. When you want to make modifications or amendments, that it comes to you, there's a hearing before you, there's not the DLCD notice, there's not the amount of hearings involved. So that was what we thought was probably the benefit of that. If changes were to be considered, it might be an easier process involved, less time consuming.
If in the future the council wanted to consider changing the zones that short-term rentals were allowed in, then how would that affect short-term rentals in the different zones if it's moved over to the business?
Sure. I think one of the things that's going to happen is there's still going to be in the land use classifications, like say the R1, the R2, the R3. When we're doing the code update, we can include short-term rentals as a permitted or a conditional use in those specific zones. So that process would likely still stay the same in terms of requiring the zoning ordinance modifications that we're doing right now, where it would require notice to DLCD. It would go to Plan Commission and Council. So I think it's the licensing component and more of the function of it. But those uses, the short-term uses, would still be spelled out in the zoning ordinance as a permitted use or a conditional use in that particular zoning district, if that makes sense.
So in a way, it's kind of divided in
A little bit. I was gonna say, it's very similar to like how we deal with marijuana and it's like this.
Yeah,
psilocybin, the mushrooms. It's a very similar process that we have for those.
Is everybody okay with that direction?
Makes sense to me.
Yes, that was my understanding. You've explained it very well, Steve. Thank you.
Okay, got enough direction?
Yeah, so I think just so everyone knows, we will still have to do the PAPA notice because we're amending the zoning ordinance. So that still would need to happen. But what would likely happen is when that comes to you, it would likely be on the same ordinance that you would be reviewing, that it would be removing it from 17 and then in that same ordinance language, relocating it to 5. So eventually when it comes back, that's probably how you'll see it.
Okay. Anything else on that? Lisa, you okay?
Yeah,
With-
no, I think
with
it's a
this?
great idea. It's a great idea, I think. Yeah.
Okay.
Now, are we excused?
No,
Yes, you may leave.
we still have good of the order.
Yeah, we have good of the order, and sometimes that's the most exciting part of the meeting. Depends on how Lisa's feeling. Okay, we will move to good of the order. Anybody have anything? Let's go, please. Retirement.
Oh, yes, that's August 3rd is Chief Jason's retirement party.
At the Seaside.
Rotary, at the
Seaside
Elks Club, yeah.
At 6 o'clock. League of Oregon Cities is going to, Business Oregon is gonna have a board meeting here on this Friday.
Seaside?
No, they're having a meet and greet Thursday in Seaside at the library, and they're coming here further to the council chambers on Friday.
I was planning on going to the one in,
That's Thursday night, and then Friday, Business Oregon's board is meeting here at 9:30.
I know that the room is booked all day.
Okay,
Karen blocked it out from 8 AM to 5, so I'm not sure what time it actually starts.
I think the board meeting starts at 9:30, and we are welcome to attend. But then the League of Oregon Cities is having a small cities meeting, and it's at the Seaside Library on Friday from 11,
Oh, yeah, and
The
that's
one.
part of our region.
our region,
Yeah.
right, if you want to go to that. Anything else for good of the order? Okay, now the meeting is adjourned.
No, you can't adjourn yet.
Oh, sorry. No, you guys are excused. Okay. The Cannon Beach City Council will hold an executive session July 30th, 2024, immediately following the city council meeting that started at 6 p.m. The executive session will be held at Cannon Beach City Hall, 163 East Gower Street, Cannon Beach, Oregon, and is being held pursuant to ORS 1926602H to consult with counsel concerning the legal rights and duties of a public body with regard to current litigation or litigation likely to be filed, and ORS 1926602F to consider information or records that are exempt by law from public inspection. Representatives of the news media are permitted to attend the executive session, but are not permitted to disclose any information related to the subject of this executive session. So this meeting is adjourned to an
Wait a
exec.
second. Jen? Jen?
She
left.
She left.
Jen.
Okay. So
Jen.
what you're gonna need to do is go back to the link that I emailed you for the executive session, and you can use that same username, email and password to log into Zoom.
Oh, you're the one you sent me that.
Completely out of this. Yeah.
Wait
So
a
I'm going
second.
to end this call in a moment and start a new call.
Yeah, you're gonna end the call and just end the call, because I have to use a different link. Yeah. So do you want me to forward it to the top of your email, Lisa? It's the one that's just for the executive session.
It's the one you sent me today.
For the executive
The
session?
one you sent me today?
Yes,
The one you sent me this afternoon?
yes.
Thank you, Steve.
But do I use the Barrett to get into it?
Yep, use my email address and my password, and that way you can attend just like you did this one.
Oh, wonderful.
Yep.
Yay,
And
okay.
then later this week, we'll get you set up with one that says Lisa Kerr instead of Jennifer Barrett.
In the future, right?
Yes.
Okay,